Imagine a lifeboat designed for 10 people. It is sturdy, it is safe, it has enough food and water to get everyone to shore. But currently, it holds 12 people. The gunwales are dipping dangerously close to the waterline. The passengers are anxious, but they are surviving. Now, imagine the captain announces that he is bringing 10 more people on board. This is not a debate about whether the captain is a nice person. This is not a debate about whether the 10 people in the water deserve to be saved. This is strictly a debate about physics. If you put 22 people in a boat built for 10, the boat does not expand. It sinks. And then, everyone drowns. The original passengers and the new arrivals. This is the state of Canada in 2026. We are witnessing a demographic experiment that has never been attempted in the history of the developed world. We are stress testing the infrastructure of a G7 nation to the point of collapse. The government calls this ambitious growth. The banks call it a GDP booster, but I call it the population trap. Welcome to the Northern Ledger. Today, we are going to look at the cold, hard math that Ottawa ignores. We are going to answer the question that haunts every renter, every student, and every patient in this country. Where will they live? To understand the scale of this crisis, we first have to examine the data that triggered this avalanche. In 2023 alone, Canada's population grew by roughly 1.2 million people. To put that in perspective, that is the equivalent of adding the entire city of Calgary, or 5 Saskatoons, or 2 Wyomings, in a single year. It was a growth rate of 3.2%. That might sound small, but in demographics, 3% is explosive. It is a rate usually seen in developing nations in Africa during the mid-20th century, not in a mature, industrialized Western economy. For comparison, the United States, a country with 10 times our population and an economy that dwarfs ours, grew by only 0.5%. Canada is growing 6 times faster than the US. This trend accelerated in 2023, and it has shaped the reality we are living in now, in 2026. The math established back then has compounded, creating the shortages we see today. But here's the problem. We are growing like a developing nation, but we are building like a museum. Let's look at housing. This is the most basic human need after food and water. Shelter. To house 1.2 million new people, assuming a modest density of 2.5 people per household, Canada would need to add roughly 480,000 new homes. Not just condos. Homes, family units, townhouses. So, how many did we actually build? In that same period, housing starts, that means the number of shovels that actually hit the ground, were approximately 220,000. Do the subtraction. We built less than half of what we needed just to keep up with the new arrivals. And remember, that deficit is just for 1 year. We already had a housing shortage before this surge began. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, the CMHC, has stated that to restore affordability, we need to build 3.5 million additional homes on top of our regular pace. That means we need to triple our construction output immediately. Is that happening? No. In fact, housing starts are trending down. Why? Because of interest rates, because of red tape, because of a labor shortage in the skilled trades. It takes 5 to 7 years to approve and build a condo tower in Toronto. It takes 10 years to plan a subdivision, but it only takes 1 stamp on a visa application to bring a person into the country. The government has completely detached the immigration pedal from the infrastructure brake. They are pressing the gas on population while the engine of supply has stalled. When you bring in 1 million people but only build 200,000 homes, the result is not a mystery. It is a mathematical certainty. Prices skyrocket. Vacancy rates drop to near zero. We are seeing the consequences in real time. In Toronto and Vancouver, rent for a 1-bedroom apartment has breached $2,500. But the crisis has metastasized. It is no longer just a big city problem. Look at Halifax. Look at Calgary. Look at rural Ontario. Rents in these places have jumped 20–30% in a single year. Why? Because when the lifeboat is full in the center, people are pushed to the edges. This is the Hunger Games of housing. When 20 people show up to view a basement apartment that costs $2,000 a month, the landlord becomes a king. He doesn't have to fix the leak. He doesn't have to paint the walls. He can demand 6 months of rent up front. And who are the contestants in this game? On one side, you have the young Canadian. Maybe they just graduated. They have student debt. They have a starter job. They played by the rules. On the other side, you have the newcomer. Maybe a family of 4, cramming into a 1-bedroom to save money. Or a group of 6 international students pooling their cash to rent a single house. The system pits them against each other. It creates resentment. But we must be very clear. The enemy is not the immigrant. The immigrant is a rational actor. They were sold a dream. They were invited here. They want a better life. The enemy is the math. The enemy is the policy that invited guests to a house that was already burning down. But housing is just the tip of the iceberg. A population boom doesn't just need bedrooms, it needs waiting rooms, it needs classrooms, it needs roads. This is what economists call capital dilution. Imagine a factory with 10 machines and 10 workers. Each worker has a machine. They are productive. Now, imagine you hire 10 more workers, but you don't buy any new machines. Now, 20 people are sharing 10 machines. Are they more productive? No. They are getting in each other's way. Productivity per worker drops. Wages stagnate. This is exactly what is happening to the Canadian standard of living. Our GDP, the total size of the economy, is getting bigger because there are more bodies. But our GDP per capita, the amount of wealth per person, is falling. We are getting collectively richer, but individually poorer. The pie is getting slightly bigger, but the slices are getting much, much smaller. This isn't an accident. This is a choice. And to understand why this choice was made, we have to look at who benefits from a surplus of labor. If housing is the victim of this crisis, then the international student program is the weapon. But it is not the students pulling the trigger. It is the system itself. To understand how we got here, we have to look at the numbers. 10 years ago, Canada hosted about 300,000 international students. Today, that number is hovering near 1 million. Did our universities suddenly become 3 times better? Did Harvard and Oxford suddenly lose their prestige to colleges in Brampton and Surrey? What happened was the explosion of a new, predatory industry, the diploma mill. Walk through a suburban strip mall in the Greater Toronto Area today. Look above the pizza shop. Look next to the nail salon. You will see a sign for a college. It has a generic name. It has no campus. It has no library. It has no history. Inside, you will find hundreds of students packed into classrooms, learning generic general business or hospitality curriculums. These institutions are not selling education. They are selling a back door to the Canadian workforce. Reports from the Auditor General have highlighted how public colleges increasingly rely on international tuition fees to survive. In Ontario alone, colleges are now more dependent on international students than they are on government funding. They have become addiction machines, hooked on the cash of foreign families. The students are paying $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year in tuition. For what? Not for the degree. They are paying for the right to work. Under previous rules, international students were strictly limited in how many hours they could work off campus. But as the labor shortage narrative took hold, the government relaxed these rules. Suddenly, the study permit became a work permit in disguise. This created a perverse incentive structure. If you are a student from a developing nation and your family sold their farm to send you to Canada, you cannot afford to fail. You have to work. You have to pay the rent. You have to pay the tuition. So you take the job at Tim Hortons, you take the job delivering Uber Eats, you take the job as a security guard. Data shows a massive influx of temporary residents into low-wage sectors. And this brings us to the second, darker consequence of the population trap: wage suppression. In a healthy capitalist economy, when there is a shortage of workers, businesses have to compete. If a coffee shop can't find staff, they have to raise wages. They have to offer benefits. They have to innovate. But in Canada, we effectively broke the laws of supply and demand. Economists at National Bank and the Bank of Canada have warned that an endless supply of low-skilled labor reduces the incentive for businesses to invest in productivity. Why would a company buy a robot or improve their software when they can hire 3 desperate people for minimum wage? This effectively puts a cap on the wages of every low-skilled Canadian worker. This is why Canada's productivity is collapsing compared to the United States. We are not building an economy of the future. We are building a low-wage economy disguised as a multicultural utopia. The winners of this system are clear: the colleges, the big landlords, the corporate retail chains. But the losers are the students themselves. We promised them a Canadian dream, and reports indicate we have given many of them a nightmare. Food banks across the GTA are reporting historic spikes in usage, driven largely by international students. Advocacy groups are sounding the alarm on students living in unsafe, overcrowded basements because they cannot afford proper housing. This is not compassion. This is exploitation. Bringing people here without a plan for where they will sleep or how they will eat is a humanitarian failure. And the losers are also young Canadians. A teenager looking for a summer job can't find one because the entry-level market is saturated. A young graduate can't find an affordable apartment because they are competing with global capital. But the strain goes beyond the labor market. It hits the very core of our social contract. Healthcare. Canada's healthcare system is a point of national pride, but it is a finite resource. It relies on a delicate balance between the number of taxpayers and the number of patients. In 2023, we added 1 million people. Did we add 1 million people's worth of hospital beds? No. Did we add 1 million people's worth of family doctors? No. In fact, the system makes it incredibly difficult for foreign-trained doctors to practice here. We have immigrants who were surgeons in their home countries driving taxis in Toronto because the licensing bodies won't recognize their credentials. So we import the patients, but we block the doctors. It is insanity. The result is a collapse in service levels. In some provinces, millions of people do not have a family doctor. Emergency room wait times are measured in days, not hours. And yet, the government's answer is simply to shrug and say, "We need to grow to pay for the aging population." But let's look at the fiscal math. Economists argue that low-wage workers pay very little in income tax. A student working part-time at minimum wage is likely a net drain on the public purse. They use the roads, the transit, and the hospitals, but their tax contribution is negligible compared to the cost of those services. So the argument that we need immigrants to pay for our pensions is flawed if those immigrants are stuck in low-wage jobs. We are growing the population, but we are shrinking the tax base per capita. We are getting fiscally weaker. We are caught in a trap. A trap where the only solution proposed for our problems is the very thing causing them. Housing is expensive? We need more construction workers, so let's bring in more people. Healthcare is collapsing? We need more nurses, so let's bring in more people. It is a Ponzi scheme of population. We are using new people to pay for the liabilities of the old people, but the new people also need services, so we need even more newer people. And like all Ponzi schemes, it works until the physical reality of the world, the lack of houses, the lack of land, the lack of doctors, intervenes. The wall is approaching, and the math has finally stopped adding up. So we have established the math. We have established the exploitation. The only question left is, why? Why would a government knowingly pursue a policy that lowers the standard of living, destroys housing affordability, and strains the social safety net to the breaking point? To find the answer, we have to follow the money. And that trail leads us to a lobby group that effectively wrote the blueprint for Canada's future. It is called the Century Initiative. Founded by top executives from asset management firms and major consulting groups, this organization has a singular, radical goal: to grow Canada's population to 100 million people by the year 2100. On their website, they use aspirational language. They talk about economic relevance. They argue that for Canada to matter on the world stage alongside giants like the US and China, we need to be bigger. They argue that a massive population is the only way to fund our aging demographics. But we must look at who funds this initiative and who benefits from it. The beneficiaries are the oligopolies. If you are a Big Five bank, more people means more mortgages and more credit cards. If you are a telecom giant, more people means more subscribers. If you are a grocery monopoly, more people means more hungry mouths. And most importantly, for the corporate elites, a massive population ensures a permanent surplus of labor. Economic theory dictates that when labor is scarce, wages go up. When labor is plentiful, wages stay flat. The Century Initiative model ensures that Canadian wages never have to rise significantly because there is always someone desperate enough to take the job for less. It is a project focused on aggregate GDP, the size of the total pie, rather than GDP per capita, the size of your slice. They treat Canada not as a home, but as an economic zone, a shopping mall with a flag. For years, anyone who dared to question these targets, economists, journalists, concerned citizens, was immediately silenced. The accusation of intolerance was used as a shield to protect corporate profits. But the irony is sickening. The Century Initiative's policy is actually hurting racialized newcomers the most. Who is living in the overcrowded basements? Who is delivering food in the snow for sub-minimum wage? Who is being exploited by slumlord landlords? It is the immigrants. By shielding their growth targets behind the language of diversity, the elites have managed to avoid scrutiny for the economic hardship their policies create. But the shield is finally cracking. The reality on the street has become too obvious to ignore. In 2024, the tide turned. Major financial institutions began to speak out. CIBC Capital Markets released a report explicitly stating that Canada is in a population trap. National Bank warned of a standard of living collapse. TD Bank warned that housing supply can never catch up to this level of demand. When the big banks, entities that usually profit from population growth, start warning that the system is breaking, you know the situation is critical. So, what is the end game? Where does this lead if we don't stop? We don't have to guess, we just have to look at the trend lines. We are heading towards the Brazilianization of the Canadian economy. A society of extreme inequality. On one side, a small asset-owning elite. They own the land, the houses, and the stocks. They benefit from the cheap labor and the high rents. On the other side, a massive, struggling class comprised of both Canadian-born workers and new immigrants who own nothing. They will rent forever. They will rely on crumbling public services. They will spend 50-60% of their income just to survive. The middle class, that beautiful, boring Canadian dream where a factory worker could buy a bungalow and a cottage, will become a memory, a relic of the past. We are already seeing the signs: tent cities in Halifax, food banks running out of food in Toronto, emergency rooms closing in rural BC. This is not the Canada we signed up for, and it is certainly not the Canada we promised to the millions of people we invited here. So, what is the solution? The solution is not to close the door forever. Canada is and should remain a welcoming country. But we need a hard reset. First, we need to tie immigration targets directly to housing starts. It is a simple formula. If we build 200,000 homes, we welcome a number that fits, not a million. The pedal must be connected to the brake. Second, we need to shut down the diploma mills. If a college is operating out of a strip mall and offering useless degrees, it should lose its license to host international students. Education should be for learning, not for selling work permits. Third, we need to prioritize high-skilled workers, doctors, engineers, builders, who actually increase our capacity to build, rather than low-skilled labor that suppresses wages. And most importantly, we need to have a national conversation about what kind of country we want to be. Do we want to be a country of 100 million people living in shoeboxes, just so our GDP numbers look good on a spreadsheet in Ottawa? Or do we want to be a country of 40 million people who are prosperous, safe, and free? The choice is ours. But the window is closing. The math is relentless. Every day we wait, the deficit grows. Every day we wait, another 1,000 people arrive with nowhere to go. The lifeboat is full. The water is rising. And the captain is still calling for more passengers. It is time to take the wheel. This has been the Northern Ledger. Thank you for watching.